FurKnight. Written and narrated by J.E. Ogilvy. Act 1. Chapter 1. Warmth in Winter. The fire burnt backwards. It was subtle, the edge of his vision, but he was damn sure of it. The smoke billowed downward, drowned beneath the waves of flame, and in the reflection on his blade it burnt true black. Its white noise voice spoke in reverse, not up close, not on those low human registers, but in the distance, in its belly. It didn't rumble, but it rolled, and it was rolling towards him and everybody else in the room, because it wasn't a fire at all. It was alive. Or he was hungry, couldn't quite be sure. He hadn't eaten in days. Well, that wasn't true. He had eaten in days, but never enough. Not for a dog like him. Not for a FurKnight. He was so damn hungry. Was he in the grips of a hunger madness? It was possible. Even plausible. Plausible? God, he was hungry. Felix tapped his claw on the oak table and pulled at the threads of conversation throughout the Twopenny Inn. It wasn't just the fire that made his ears twitch, and as he sat there in the corner of the room, a tapestry of information invaded his senses. A barmaid was juggling tankards and plates from kitchen to table, her shoes far too small, each clack of her heel muted by worn leather touching cobblestone. The discomfort was contagious, and tugged at his whiskers. The smoke lingered between everything, painting halos around heads and collecting in the eaves. A singular damp patch stained the steep thatch roof, hinting at neglect and poor maintenance gone mossy green with time. It was clear the clientele didn't care, though. Their laughter, music, and broad smiles showed that they were happy to let the old building go to rot. The drip-drip of that leaking roof continued to pull at Felix's hackles and left him wanting a bath. Heavy-coated individuals threw him sideways glances from the bar, hunched and grumbling and doing very little to hide the topic of their conversation. Of course they were talking about him, and why wouldn't they be? He was Felix FurKnight, a monster hunter and protector of the realm, a walking marvel. If he were in their shoes, or in this case boots, he would be talking about him as well. Yet their undue attention was the last thing he needed that evening. He slouched back in his chair and let his mug of ale conceal his face a little further, the cold tin a comfort under his paw and the drink a hug for his belly. He would only be a little longer. Once the fire had warmed his core, he would be gone. It was dangerous out here, so close to people and so out in the open. After all, people were so damn risky. His sword lay nonchalantly across the table, its strange reflection blinking back at him. What do you reckon, sword? Is it time to go? He followed its length across the inn and caught somebody staring back. They peered at him over the silhouette of a broad shoulder, their face barely visible and eyes wide before disappearing again. He flexed his scarred paw and felt the itchy discomfort of marked skin failing to yield. Stupid paw. What was he doing here? One drink and gone. That was all he had promised himself. Yet, when he looked back, there she was, worn and ageless, with charcoal hair and porcelain skin, her blue eyes edged with crow's feet. They'd seen things, those eyes. They were the water beyond the bay spire battlements, light blue and fading to black. What was down there? He hadn't a clue. A fist hammered a distant table and woke him from his dream. It was time to go. He couldn't afford to get involved in other people's business, and absolutely could not afford to make a fuss. He swallowed his ale in one swift motion, dried his paws on his neckerchief, then grabbed the familiar hilt of his greatsword and slid to the floor. Patrons gawped and stared as he passed, all narrowed-eyed and slack-jawed. FurKnights were a rare occurrence this far from Bayspire, and he expected his audience were as afraid of him as they were confused. He smiled back and gave them the odd wink or thumbs up, but received none in reply. It was funny, given how many of them were almost twice his size, but he reckoned his greatsword, 6 feet in length and lazily perched over his shoulder, made up for the difference. At the end of the aisle of tables, the door clattered in the wind, the winter's cold threatening to tear it from its hinges. Beyond its wooden frame, the blue night beckoned, the moon winking a white ray through a hole in its planks. He went to place a paw on the brass handle, but faltered, his stomach rumbling in protest. What it was trying to tell him he was unsure, and try as he might to strike up a conversation, it was unlikely to reply. Yet something itched to him all the same. It was all so risky. He turned his heavy head and saw her sitting there, her back to the window and not a stone's throw away. Directly opposite sat, or at least perched, a mountain of a man. He was as square as a castle, and nearly as wide, his bald head inked with intricate tattoos. He wore a long black coat lined with fur, its tall collar covering almost all his red features, barring a nose ring above a fine bushy beard. One of his gigantic ham-hock hands dwarfed a steel tankard, warping and bending it in his colossal grip. Whilst he was leant uncomfortably forwards, she was leant back as far as possible, her chair almost tipping. Lovers, they were not. The brass handle was cool under Felix's paw, the weighted mechanism inviting him to leave. Staying would invite trouble, and trouble would only slow him down. His mission was of the utmost importance, and if he placed it in jeopardy, then lives would be in the balance. Sure, his life, but it was important to him all the same. He chewed his beard, then peered back. There was a benefit to being only 3 feet tall. It allowed him to see the shine of a sword beneath the man's coat, and how he had muddied one side of his boots, but not the other, riding in bad weather. He could see the frayed edges of her thick canvas dress, and the paw prints that ran up the front, once damp, but now dry. She lived close, and he had travelled. She was unarmed, and he was not. Felix's stomach growled. "Ciri took 7 days," said the man, his voice worn, full of gravel. "Every moment an ache and every breath a laboured decline. Perez could wield a pickaxe one morning, and in that same afternoon we were burying him with it." The woman shuffled in place, her hands on the edge of her chair. "I don't know why you're telling me this." "Because I want you to understand, Brea." He crashed the tankard in his grasp, sloshing golden ale across the tabletop. "Every day costs lives. Every hour is a town's worth of pain." She had turned away, her hair thrown across her face as if the man's outburst had been a gale. It was through those tangled curls that her gaze met Felix's again. "Hello, Brown Eyes." Her voice was soft. She beamed at him, then turned her fresh confidence back to the mountainous man. "This is the one, Cran, the one you've been looking for." Felix had closed the gap, his head barely above the tabletop. The man looked down at him, his face a clenched fist. It was all so curious, and although Felix knew very little of their situation, he couldn't help but stand up for the little guy. After all, he was one. "Can I sit? My sword is tired." He levered the great length of steel over his shoulder, then slid it across the tabletop. "I'm going to sit." Although it didn't sharpen his appearance, having the fluffy physique and pudgy voice of something intensely cute did tend to delay the process of getting stabbed. "I'm adorable," he reminded himself. "Act adorable." He slid a chair over, the scratch of its legs drowned out by the fiddler player in the corner of the room, then climbed to its summit. There was a prolonged silence as they both took him in, then the sword, then him again. If there had been a fog of tension between the two of them, he was now bathing in it. "He doesn't look like a sorcerer." The man narrowed his eyes. "You've been in those mountains for too long, Cran. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this?" She raised her palms. "Doesn't he match your description?" Sorcerer? It was all so interesting. Felix knew sorcerers to be hooded, red-eyed creatures with horns and pointed teeth. They spoke in guttural, demonic languages, imparted to them by ominous, dark entities, and spent their evenings reading entrails. Or at least that's how he imagined them. He'd never met one before. "Yes," said Felix, doing his best to play along, but coming out stilted. "Do I not?" Cran looked into his twisted tankard, then scowled. "Forgive me if I am hesitant to stake my life on fairy tales and magic." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "If this fails, or if any of my men come to harm, well, you've held this back for too long, Brea. Your inaction has led to countless deaths, and will lead to countless more. If you try to fool us, I will add you to their number." He ran a sleeve across his beard, then stood, making the table creak as he pushed a finger into it. "Do not leave." Felix looked up and saw one of Cran's eyes twitching before he turned and worked his way back to the bar. People were so damn risky. "I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty confused." Felix lowered his gaze to his sword, then spoke plainly. "This whole situation doesn't appear to be particularly friendly, and I expect you chose to catch the attention of a knight of the realm for good reason. So, I'm going to need you to start talking. And I mean like, faster than a greyhound on rabbit day." "They think you're someone you're not." He tilted his head to the side. "I'm rarely mistaken." "It's complicated." "Well, use small words." He squinted. "Who is he?" "A miner from Rockridge. Down in his luck and getting deeper." "And what does he want with you?" Her bay blue eyes peered up at him again. "Something impossible. A cure for the incurable. He thinks you can help him. With sorcery." "Is that right?" The complicated had just become the absurd. He reached for his sword and turned to leave, but her hand fell on his. "Listen, you reminded me of someone from across the room, my little boy. You have the same hair, and when I saw you, I just... Please. I know it's all ridiculous, and I've told them this, but they just won't listen. They will kill what remains of my family in search of this cure, and I'm lost." "One drink and gone," he reminded himself. This attention was dangerous, yet here he was inviting more. Still, when he peered up through those curls, he knew he wasn't leaving. The edge in her voice was of desperation, isolation, an inverted cage. Her world was a prison. She had nowhere to run, and that was a feeling he knew so very well. He raised an eyebrow. "Magic?" "I know." Her voice cracked as she gave him a weak smile. "It's ridiculous." "You leave, and you run." He gripped the hilt of his sword beneath her grasp. "You run, and I'll buy you some time." Tears ran down the curve of her face, leaving dark marks on the tabletop. She shook her head. "If only that easy." "Green eyes!" Cran's voice cut across the din. "The sorcerer had green eyes, Breya. So my men tell me. Whatever this is, it's a ruse." The inn died to near silence, the drip of the ceiling a shout in Felix's ear. The room felt warmer, and that strange reflection on his blade had returned, a nervous blur at the edge of his vision. "Be brave," he told himself. "It always helps." "It's a bad idea," Felix let his voice bark and travel. "Whatever you got floating around in that brain of yours ain't going to work. Let it lie before you regret your decision." The big man took a step forward and drew a polished cutlass that reflected the fireplace in black, red, and gold. "There is no need for violence, dog. Merely hand over the woman, and do the right thing." The door rattled, the sheer weight of the weather desperate to get in. Patrons fanned out towards the walls and windows, while some huddled behind the bar and barrels. Even the fire seemed to quell in anticipation. Felix eased himself onto the table and casually placed his sword over his shoulder, just like the pictures he had seen in the Red Book of the FurKnight. Cran was standing between him and the bar, flanked by two of the trench-coated men from before, 3 against 1. "I ain't looking for trouble," said Felix. "In fact, all I wanted to do was finish my drink, but you had to go and threaten an unarmed civilian, and that just ain't right." "There is no cure, Cran." Breya stood next to him in his periphery. "The magic would kill you just for trying." Felix's ears twitched. "Not so ridiculous, then. How curious." Cran pointed his sword. "Be reasonable, Breya. You force our hand." The 2 lackeys at Cran's side began to flank them, spreading out wide and between the tables. In lieu of formal welcomes, Felix assigned them simple names, Moustache on the left and Gangly on the right. Neither of them was handsome, and that was fortunate. It made what he was about to do far easier. He poised low, touched the wood beneath his paws, and focused his mind. So damn risky. He swung his sword and ripped a tankard from the table, sending it hurtling towards Moustache's face. It burst into a cloud of red, knocking the man off his feet and out of view. Breya roared and leapt towards Cran, batting tables and chairs away as she closed the distance. The man tried to raise his sword, but she barreled into him, and they disappeared into the furniture in a tangle of blows. Gangly stalked closer, his eyes rolling through fast fingers. "Hello, doggy." Felix stepped aside and levelled his sword, his eyes narrowed and the world still. His lungs strained with potential, his muscles as tight as bowstrings, and mind devoid of thought. The man's every motion stretched out before him, sweat following brow, and tendons tensed. Gangly flicked his wrists and launched blades from within his jacket, the metal shining silver in the firelight. Felix parried, each projectile singing a sweet note as they ricocheted off his precisely positioned steel. No more a threat than the rain on the old thatch roof. He chuckled. "Out of knives, old man?" "Not by half." Gangly shone a gold-encrusted smile before pulling a pair of dirks from his leather trousers. None of Felix's enclave training had prepared him for anything as exotic as a tavern brawl, but he wasn't one to loosen his bite once his teeth were in. He eyed the man's sharp weapons and bounced on his toes, all the while a black shape grew at the edge of his vision. "Interesting." He dashed towards a distant chair and the gangly man beyond, slamming into the top rail, pitching it backwards and throwing himself across the room with his sword raised. Gangly drew his defence upward, both blades high as Felix let go of his own and curled into a ball. The man's face spoke a cocktail of emotions: confusion, anger, fear, and acceptance. long before Felix slammed into his chest and forced a breathless gasp from his body. He rode the unfortunate miner all the way to the floorboards, watched his face slacken as his head cracked against the deck. Amongst the smell of booze and sweat, there was a musk, an illness, a rot. What had appeared to be tattoos at a distance were now clearly black veins and bruises. To his left, Brea lay amongst the broken tables and chairs, her back against the bar and hand to her stomach. Cran was stood over her, his sword pushed against her chest. "Give us the mage, Brea, or die alongside us." Her face was bloodied and beaten, and a red line ran from her mouth when she spoke. "I can't. I won't." Felix clenched his paws and looked about the room, his heart thumping in his chest. Moustache lay within the remains of a broken table, his back rising and falling, whilst Gangly was worse for wear but still breathing. Nothing was lost. Not yet. Nothing that couldn't be undone. "Everyone's still breathing, Cran. You can still walk away from this." The man lowered his weapon. "Walk away? In a few short hours none of us will be standing." He pulled his shirt to reveal dark veins across his ashen chest. "The black vein has got deep within Rockridge. My men, my family, were all done for. But her, she holds the only thing that might keep us alive. The only thing that can defeat this blight." He pushed his cutlass against her neck, the whites of his eyes bright against his dirtied features. "It's desperate times, Brea. Give him up." "I'm sorry. I truly am." Tears ran down her face, and as she blinked them away, she looked towards Felix. "Forgive him, please. He can't control it." The front door slammed open, and a cold wind encircled the room. It grew faster, rendering vortices in the smoke and robbing the torches of their flame. Tables, cutlery, chairs and candles were all lifted into the swirling chaos. A warmth swelled behind Felix, and when he looked up, he saw Cran's eyes flash orange. Before he could blink, a burning tendril rushed between them and wrapped the man in a binding flame. He screamed as he was raised upwards towards a chaotic, burning face. Hiss, crack, burn. His skin and muscles were turned to ash, stolen by the breeze. One moment he had been a man, and the next, bones. Felix ran, his mind lost for better options, his legs aching yet still willing to yield to his command. He dodged chairs and barrels, plates and utensils, the air whistling in his ears. The flow and turbulence ran across his fur unnaturally, confused and never in a single direction. When he finally made it within sight of the door, he saw it. A silhouette against the night's blue gloom, a figure no taller than a FurKnight, holding their hands aloft depicting the changing shapes and patterns that he felt across his body. He slid to a stop, unable to make sense of it, before being punched in the face by a piece of flying furniture. Felix's head spun, his nose filled with ash and smoke, and when he opened his eyes the image was far worse. A burning avatar hung in the ever-moving air, a wreathing, ethereal blaze. It consumed the small tavern, towering over everything. Wisps of fire leapt from its elongated form, patching the roof in a star-field of flame. He knelt amongst the wreckage and considered his odds, his muscles aching and reluctant, all broken fibres and acidic veins. Not entirely in my favour. With an outstretched paw, he searched and grabbed and found the hilt of his sword again, before standing to confront what was, quite obviously, a demon. The creature's uncanny face formed a thin, long smile, black against gold, broad and unnatural. Crack, hiss, FurKnight. He placed his feet and stared it down, its black eyes growing in place like deep pockets of nothingness that darkened the room and consumed the light. The heat was difficult to bear, and although he panted hard, it wasn't any better. His vision blurred, and he reconsidered his position. "I'm completely screwed." "Lawmaker, lawbreaker." The creature was more face than body now, inching closer. "Slave to the king and reject of the queen. Prepare to be cleansed in flame." "No, thank you." He swung his sword and cut through the air and embers. In response, the creature jabbed forward with a sunbright arm to grab his blade and lock it in place. The shock pulsed through him, and he struggled to hold his ground, his nails scratching stone. Hot metal crept into his nose. Warmth flowed through his weakened grip, and when his sword began to glow a soft orange, the creature yawned a jagged smile. "Not this sword." Felix slid his blade free from its fiery grasp, then rolled forwards, his tail flashing hot, then cold, then hot again, as he passed under its searing reach and sprung upwards. In one fluid motion, he thrust his sword skyward and severed an arm from its body. It hissed. Insolence! The limb burst into cinders and was taken away by the wind, only to be replaced by another that unwound from its torso. The creature loomed closer, its hot breath boring into him, pushing and pulling at his body. He closed his eyes and expected the inevitable, but death never came. Its grin had soured, its dark eyes now shrunken pinpricks that desperately searched the room. All its anger leaked out in plumes of steam and smoke, leaving nothing behind but the sleeping fire in the grand stone fireplace. Felix dropped to his knees amongst the scattered flames, the thatch and furnishings busily burning away as snow fell through the hole in the ceiling. Several patrons spied over the edge of a countertop, and Felix's gaze fell to Brea collapsed against the bar. She lay there motionless, her eyes closed and chin to chest with a red stain across her stomach. His efforts had been in vain. Despite all his heroism, her fate had been the same. Between them stood a figure, the same one from the doorway, a silhouette much like his own. They spoke in a high, timid voice. "My Brea, dead and gone forever. The fire couldn't save her, and I cannot remake her." Felix closed the gap, the sound of sizzling snowflakes in the air. His legs were heavy now, made all the worse for the weight of the burnt plank he was dragging behind him, and the pain in his chest where the furniture had knocked him down. "My condolences, friend." The sorcerer spun in place, their emerald eyes bright in the half-light. They were a FurKnight, or something like one, which raised so many questions. Too many questions. "You were her family?" The sorcerer looked back at Brea just as Felix's timber met their skull. They landed on the boards in a tangle of fur and limbs, still warm and still breathing, but Felix was taking no chances. Sorcerers are so damn risky. He stood over them in the wreckage of the Twopenny Inn, a piece of blackened board over his shoulder and a paw on his hip. "In the name of the king, I'm arresting you for the use of illegal magics and, quite obviously, murder."